the establishment of the electric plant in 1895, the Philippines was ready to receive the electronic invention that was the rage of Europe. On January 8, 1897, a Señor Pertiera ordered a 60mm Gaumont chronophotograph and presented a program of stills and chronophotographs called the Espectáculo Científico de Pertiera. On September 18, 1897, Messieurs Liedman and Peritz introduced the Lumière cinematograph, along with several Lumière films. Only the Spaniards and their wealthy native friends could afford first-class tickets. The masses were permitted to buy only second-class seats. A year later, Admiral Dewey brought along a cameraman to record daily life in the American colony. These films were exhibited abroad, but were not shown locally due to the projector's format incompatibility. In 1905, a visiting cameraman of the Edison Biograph, Herbert Wyndham, shot scenes of the Manila Fire Department, the San Fernando Bridge, and the Escolta. These were the first films on Manila shown locally. Because projector format was only standardized in 1909, movies did not flourish until then. The screenings were too few and far between. If any new films arrived, these were usually shown as entr'acte in vaudeville shows or as a carnival sideshow. In 1909, a theatrical network was finally put into place. No sooner had Albert Yearsley converted the Orpheum into Empire Theater than Goulet and Teague inaugurated the Anda Theater a day before Yearsley's opening. The Sorilla and the Manila Grand Opera House were also fitted with projectors and for a time were operated as movie houses. Albert Yearsley became the first resident to shoot local films. On December 30, 1909, he shot the Rizal Day celebration at Luneta, which was shown April of the following year. This was followed by shots of the Manila Carnival of 1910, the eruption of Taal Volcano in 1911, the first airplane flight over Manila by flyer Bud Mars, the trip of the Igorot to Barcelona, the Cebu Typhoon of 1912. In the same year, there was yet another race to film the first feature. Producer Harry Brown, cinematographer Charles Martin, and scenarist Edward Gross organized the Rizalina Photoplay Company and produced La Vida de José Rizal. But just as announcements for its opening were splashed all over the newspapers, Albert Yearsley took Severino Reyes's Gran Compañía de Zarzuela and shot El Fusilamiento de Dr. José Rizal. Given the success of the two films, both film companies produced other features. As this was the decade following the expulsion of the Spaniards, the Phil-American War, and the massacres and untold deaths of Filipinos, nationalism was running at fever pitch. Despite being Americans, these filmmakers cashed in on the prevailing sentiments and produced films with historical themes. Their efforts, however, fell into the hands of the censors. In 1912, Gross, Brown, and Martin shot Los Tres Mártires, a film on the three martyr priests, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. The censors excised the execution scene for fear that it may foment unrest in the Spanish community. Albert Yearsley's adaptation of the zarzuela, Walang Sugat, was also withdrawn after 11 days of screening. However, Gross, Brown, and Martin had more luck with La Conquista de Filipinas de Legazpi, which was passed despite the dissenting vote of a Captain Scott, who objected to the violence. In 1915, Edward Gross realized his lifelong dream of filming the two Rizal novels, Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. Budgeted at a huge sum during those days, both films ran over 2 hours. Non-historical films finally made their bow in 1916. Gross produced Nena la Bojeadora, with actress Marie de la Tronquede in the title role. A champion athlete, Nena de la Cruz borrows money from the town usurer when her father becomes ill. As the debt becomes due, Nena desperately accepts the offer of a boxing match with a Manila champion prize fighter. Albert Yearsley trained his eyes on local news. In 1914, he shot the trial of noted criminal Eusebio Borja, convicted of murder and theft. The newspapers raised an outcry against the filming, and the movie was never shown. But the dominance of Gross and Yearsley ended at the time America joined the First World War. Being transients in a foreign land, these Americans soon packed their bags after amassing their fortunes. Gross sold his equipment to Jose Nepomuceno, a fast-rising photographer whose outfit, Electropargelio, was a popular photo studio. Nepomuceno was the first Filipino to shoot films. In 1919, he directed Dalagang Bukid and its sequel, La Venganza de Don Silvestre, a filmization of the Zarzuelo of Hermógenes Ilagan and Leon Ignacio. However, a studio fire ended Nepomuceno's aspirations. 2 events enticed more Filipinos to the film art. In 1919, Universal Studios filmed episodes of The Dragon's Net with a top Hollywood star Marie Walkamp in Intramuros, Pagsanghan, and Parañaque. In 1921, Elena Jurado came home after appearing in 2 Hollywood films, White Hands with Hobart Bosworth, and 4 Flushers, and was feted by civic and media groups. After that, Filipinos were attracted to the lodestar that was Hollywood. They either traveled as legitimate passengers or worked as ship musicians or janitors to get to Hollywood. They returned years later to make their mark in Philippine cinema. In 1926, fresh from Hollywood, Vicente Salumbides revived Filipino filmmaking with Miracles of Love. Jose Nepomuceno was his cameraman and labman. For the first time, close-ups, fast-cutting, Hollywood-style makeup were utilized as part of the local filmmakers' vocabulary. Stream of consciousness techniques were also used. Salumbides' achievement was the impetus towards the creation of the Filipino film industry. He veered away from novelty and introduced the language of cinema. The film caught the imagination of the public, encouraged more productions, and attracted more people to a movie career. Despite a cautious start, Philippine cinema's output rose to 7 in 1929, 10 in 1930, 10 in 1931, and 25 in 1932. Jose Nepomuceno renewed his interest in filmmaking, and with the help of stockholder friends, was producing a film almost every 2 months. New filmmakers, some returning from Hollywood, set up their own film companies. Julian Manansala, Arthur Matthews, Manuel Silos, Carlos Van der Tolosa, Ernesto Lopez, Eduardo de Castro, and the first woman filmmaker, Brigida Perez Villanueva. Ironically, the coming of sound was silent cinema's fecund period. On August 3, 1929, sound films synchronized to phonograph records were introduced. On October 12, 1929, the first optically recorded sound films were brought in by Leon Britton, a British engineer who would also play an important role in the development of locally produced sound movies. Immediately after, a talkie fever swept Manila. On March 4, 1930, Carlos van der Tolosa presented his first film, Collegian Love, the first Filipino film to be synchronized with phonograph records. In 1932, George Musser imported 50,000 pesos worth of optical sound equipment and spent a year shooting Ang Aswang with Charles Miller as his cinematographer. The film, which was in Spanish and English, opened at the Lyric Theater on January 1st, 1933. In 1933, two Americans, George Harris and Eddie Tate, envisioned a Hollywood in Manila. They wanted to create an Asian film capital which could produce films not only for the Philippines, but also for Indonesia, Malaya, and China. As a test, they brought in 3 Hollywood technicians and embarked on a partnership with Jose Nepomuceno. They attached soundtracks to his half-finished films Punyal na Ginto, Makata at Paraluman, and Dr. Cuba. Encouraged by the market response, Eddie Tate and George Harris set up their own company, Philippine Films. The duo's vision was grand. Using Hollywood as their model, they formed separate departments for each of the crafts. They scheduled a quota of films to be produced each year. On November 20, 1933, Tate and Harris invited high government officials to the inauguration of the first soundstage. This was the beginning of the studio system in the Philippines. The pair was also responsible for other firsts in cinema. In 1935, they started the first color lab with Paul Perry as supervisor. However, this was limited to the production of shorts and news features. Also in the same year, in collaboration with DMHM Media, they started the first newsreel service. The success of Philippine films sparked the studio boom of the 30s. In 1935, with a group of investors headed by Raimundo Navarro, Jose Nepomuceno reorganized his Malayan Pictures Corporation into Parloton Hispano-Filipino. In 1937, Sampaguita Pictures was formed by Congressman Pedro Vera. In 1938, Excelsior Pictures, considered the most modern studio at the time, was founded by Don Ramon Araneta. LVN, another major studio, was formed by 3 friends, Doña Narcisa Sisang de Leon, Carmen Villonco, and Eleuterio Navoa. Jose Nepomuceno, after having been ousted from Parloton in 1936, resurfaced with exotic films, with co-founders Jesus Cacho and Julian Salgado. At the outbreak of war, the film industry was producing more than 60 films a year. The years before the war was also one of the great periods of Philippine cinema. Musicals, melodramas, horror flicks, South Sea dramas, and films with a nationalist slant found favor with the movie-going public. The outstanding, however, were movies on agrarian problems, folk narratives, revolutionary dramas, and zarzuelas. It was also during this period that a new breed of directors who were to dominate the post-war era made their debuts. Former silent movie star Gregorio Fernandez launched his directorial career with Asahar at Kabaong, Ramon Estela with Bayan at Pag-ibig, Manuel Conde with Sawing Gantimpala, Lamberto Avellana with Sakay, and Gerardo de Leon with Bahay Kubo. Movie stars, too, became fixed in the firmament. Rosa del Rosario, Carmen Rosales, Elsa Oria, Rosario Moreno, Mila del Sol, Rogelio de la Rosa, Leopoldo Salcedo, Angel Esmeralda, Fernando Poe Sr., and Rudy Concepcion were the period's top stars, commanding not only their studio's solicitousness, but also the public's adulation and patronage.
Ay ng ating ay laging masaya kahit saan napapantok sa awit at tugtog. Halina't pagsikapan ang ating pagkanta na tayo ay purihin at laging palakpakan. Ito ang ating ngayon na upang magulat. Walang makakakita sa atin ay mapagulat at tayo makakita na upang magalang. Malaga magbinas sa sayang ng pahinga. Ito ang ating ayaw na di matatanda. Ang matinda at lang makakapita. Iloy ng magulat at tayo'y magpapikot. Walang magdalaga maganda tayo na pahinga.
The bombs fell on Manila on December 8, 1941. Manila was declared an open city on January 1942. But the movie industry continued to flourish. Films that were in production were ultimately finished and screened during the war. When the raw stock was used up, movie makers moved on to stage productions. This began an important period in the development of Philippine theater. In 1944, the Japanese established Eiga Haikyusha, a distribution and production company, and shot propaganda films. Their first venture was The Dawn of Freedom, which focused on the friendship between the Filipino and Japanese combat troops and the oppressiveness of the Americans.
I know you're going to corridor and saying goodbye to me, but I'm sorry, I cannot understand what you're saying. I wish I could understand you, mother. Captain Gomez, ただ一つ、これだけは分かってくれ。日本とフィリピン、敵同士じゃないぞ。日本、フィリピン、日本、フィリピン、I understand. Nippon, Philippines, East. じゃあ、発射でフィリピンのために頑張れよ。さようなら。
In the same year, Jose Esperanza Cruz's novel Ikatlong Maria was adapted by Tsutomu Sawamura and directed by Gerardo de Leon. The film industry was one of the first to rise from the ruins of war. On March 4, 1946, LVN presented the first post-war film, Manuel Conde's Orasang Ginto, on the sufferings and heroism of the Filipino guerrilla. A marked change in the mood had descended on the industry. Gentle innocence and coyness gave way to hard-boiled realism. Criminality and violence became the more pronounced themes.
Nalalaman kong hindi ka masamang tao. Magkatotohanan, lahat ng tao ay pinanganak na mabuti. Kaya lamang mayroong sumasamay dahil sa hindi pagkakaroon ng magandang pagkakataon. Gaya ko. Ayaw ko sumama. Ayaw ko lumabat sa batas. Ngunit, ang daigdig ay napakalapit sa akin. Hindi ako masamang tao. Hindi ako masamang tao. Ha? Kumaingay, ha?
For the next 10 years, the returning guerrilla and his re-entry problems were the themes that dominated Filipino movies. During the first year, euphoria was in the air. The end of hostilities was celebrated in Manuel Silos's Victory Joe as it light-heartedly looked at Filipinas embracing the American GIs as conquering heroes.
Uy! Dilata! Saan mo na dahil?
Binigay sa akin ng mga kaibigan kong Amerikano.
Hello, Joe!
Oo eh.
Hello.
Bakit? Kilala mo ba sila?
Hindi.
O, ba't mo binabate?
Ano?
Pangit tignan yun. Baka akalain yung mga taong yan ang babaeng Pilipina basta-basta lang.
Sapagkat ang aking pagbati ay dahilan lamang sa malaking utang na loob natin sa kanila. Hindi ba sila ang tagapagligtas natin?
At ako, hindi ba ako isang guerrilla at tumulong din sa pagligtas sa inyo? Dapat mong alamin na 10 hapong sniper ang aking inilibing.
Ano? Ang ibig mo bang sabihin nilibing mo sila ng buhay?
Hindi. Pinatay muna sila ng Amerikano at ako naglibing.
But euphoria soon turned into disillusion as political corruption and social strife demolished the gains of liberation. In back pay, disgruntled guerrillas talked of joining the communist Hukbalahap movement over the non-implementation of agrarian reforms and non-payment of their war benefits.
Kung magsalita ng ganyan, kung ikaw ay naghirap, lalo ako, sapagkat ako nagpundar nitong unit na ito dito sa ating ngayon.
Nalalaman kong marami dito sa ating taga-nayon ng naggerilya. Subalit ako'y nagtataka na marami dyan na hindi naman naglingkod sa bayan ay una pang tumanggap kaysa sa atin. Samantalang tayong naggerilya na nagtigis ng dugo sa bataan at halos buhay natin ang ating puhunanin ay hindi pa tumatanggap hanggang ngayon.
Baka naman inaayos pang para sa atin. Ako'y naniniwala na tayo'y hindi babayaan ng ating pamahalaan.
Bata nga namang ire. At kailan pa? Tayo ang dapat unahin. Katulad mo, ikaw ay wala ng pag-asa sa iyong buhay. Sapagkat ikaw ay napasmadahilan sa kabutihan ng iyong paglilingkod. Bakit hindi bigay ang para sa iyo para ikaw ay merong ikabuhay?
Una-una lamang yung Walang. Pero pasya mo.
Pasya?
Ba?
Narito ang aking pasya.
Hoy, itago ninyo.
Sa pamagitan nito ay maaari kong makuha ang aking pakli na inaasahan na intindihan mo.
Nalalaman mo na ipinahin natin ang buhay natin sa kamatayan upang ipagtanggol ang ating bansa. Ngayon naman dapat na tayo nilang ningapin. Hindi ba? Maniwala ka, Maksi, na pagka nagkataon, gagawin kong lahat ang aking magagawa upang ipagtanggol ang ating karapatan.
Talagang yun ang nararapat, Karding. Ipagtanggol natin lahat ang ating karapatan. Panahon na upang wakasan ang pangating ginagawa ng pamahalaan.
Wakasan ang pamahalaan?
In palaboy ng tadhana, a guerrilla pawns his medal so he could order lunch for himself and a street urchin.
Flash, mahalagang balita. Ang digma, ang pangatlong gera mundial ay sumiklab na. Ang Pilipinas ay makikilahok sa panig ng Amerika. Tinatawagan ang lahat ng mga opisyal at kawal ng ating hukbo. Magtungo agad sa General Headquarters. Maghintay ng mga susunod na balita sa istasyon ding ito.
Siya rin. Inay, ako'y makikidigma. Magsusundalo ako. Kailangan ng ating bayan ng bawat Pilipino.
With the advent of the Korean and Vietnam Wars, the posture of heroism amidst destitution became more pronounced. In Lamberto Avellana's award-winning Anak Dalita, a bemedaled Korean War veteran ends up in the slums and engages in currency smuggling as a means of livelihood.
L, I say L-O, L-O-B, L-O-B-E, love, I love you, Elena.
B, I say B-A, B-O-Y, I say Bobby. What? B-A-B-O-Y, Bobby. Babariba, baraboy. Babariba, baraboy. Babariba, baraboy. Babariba, baraboy. Babariba, baraboy. Baboy, 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 baboy. Kumanta tayo lahat. Dalaw-daw. Ay hanggang ay malikli. Di makikilang galaw-galaw. Ang lahat ginagalaw. Napakaharot, napakagalaw. Parang kinikilig. Kapag mahibang ang katulad ko sa iyo, biro-biro ang simula, ang wakas pala ay ano.